Hi, welcome back. Today I'm going to be doing sort of a May wrap up. I really don't know what this video is going to turn into. I tried to film my May wrap up and I was just not having a good time filming it. I felt very repetitive filming it, and that's because I vlogged for the entire month of May. I talked about every single book that I read in May in a weekly vlog, and I did full reviews of every book that I finished this month in my vlogs. And I know that not everybody watches the vlogs, and that's totally fine, but I just didn't want to sit down and talk about all the books that I read in May again when I've already basically reviewed them. And so instead I'm gonna do kind of an abbreviated May. I'm gonna talk about my stats for the month, and then I thought I might do like my highs and lows, like the books that I didn't enjoy and the books that I really did enjoy. I don't know, I'm gonna test it out for May because I'm probably gonna continue doing the vlogs for a while. Until I get bored of it, I wanna keep doing the weekly reading vlogs. I figured that this might be a good compromise to just talk about like some of the books for the month of May and not every single book. So I'm gonna start with my stats, like I said, and then I'm just gonna do a couple of low books for the month and the few that I really enjoyed. I actually had a pretty decent reading month in May. I read 13 books total, and that equaled 4,960 pages, which is an average of about 160 pages a day, which is just wild to me that I'm averaging so high. This is the second month in a row where I've averaged pretty high, and I think it's because I've been just listening to a ton of audiobooks. I've been taking my dog on a walk pretty much every day, and I was listening to an audiobook when I was taking her on a walk, and we were going for like an hour or so every day. So I got through a lot of audiobooks that way. I did listen to 10 audiobooks in May, so that makes sense. One of my goals for 2022 is that I want to get my physical TBR down, and if you'll notice, if you didn't watch my most recent vlog, I'm kind of in a bit of a different setup today because I rearranged my whole office. I actually decided that I wanted to put my bookshelves on the wall where my little couch was, and so my couch is over on the other wall and my bookshelves are in this like corner here, and I really love it. I was able to split it up, so these two shelves right here are all the books that I have read. Every book on these shelves is read, and then this is the one shelf of books that I haven't read. So I've gotten it down to 2 shelves full of read books and only 1 shelf full of unread books, which I'm very happy with. And my goal that I talk about in every video is that I want to be reading more of the books on my physical TBR than I bring on new books. So kind of like try to keep my books balanced every month. And this month, between all the books that I read off of my physical TBR and the books that I chose to unhaul that I hadn't read, I actually got rid of 11 books. Like I got it down 11 books, and I only brought 3 new books onto my TBR. So that's pretty good. Like that's a pretty good average. I've been doing really well every month. I don't think there's been a single month this year that I've had more books come onto my TBR than go off. So that's great. Surprisingly, all 13 books that I read in May were adult books. I don't know that I can remember the last time I had an entire reading month that was all adult. No YA, no middle grade, no new adult, just adult. In fact, I don't think it's ever happened. And then in terms of the genres that I read a graphic novel that was kind of like a mystery sci-fi story. I read some nonfiction. I read a mystery, fantasy, romance, contemporary, and the majority of the books that I read in May were actually literary fiction. I read 5 literary fiction books in May, which is wild, but I'm very happy with it. So with those stats out of the way, I'm gonna briefly talk about the couple of books that I consider kind of low points for the month, and then a few of the books that I really enjoyed. My first low for the month of May was My Favorite Thing is Monsters by Emile Ferris. This is the first volume in a 2-volume graphic novel series all about this girl named Karen. She's living in like the 1970s in Chicago, and at the start of the story she finds out that one of her neighbors has recently died. The police ruled it a suicide, but Karen thinks that something a little bit more sinister happens. Along with her investigating the mysterious death of her neighbor, Karen is also dealing with the fact that her mother just recently found out that she's sick and she's not really sure what's going to happen, and she is having some trouble with some people at school, and she's also kind of coming to terms with who she is, both her cultural identity but also her sexual identity. And there's just a lot going on in this story. Now, first off, I would not be able to mention this book without mentioning how beautiful the artwork is. Like, it's truly some of the most stunning art that I've ever seen, and I can only imagine how long it took for the author to draw this, how much detail and time went into this graphic novel. Unfortunately, the story left a little bit to be desired for me. This, I think, just had a little bit too much going on. I really liked the mystery aspect of it, and I was enjoying the parts of the story where Karen was trying to kind of like come to terms with who she is, but I think there was just a little bit too much extra stuff thrown in that bogged the reading experience down for me. There were just like tangents of stuff that I was so confused about what was going on. There's a portion of the book where she's learning about her neighbor that's died, learning about her past, and we get to read some sections from her neighbor's point of view, and I just felt like a lot of that stuff didn't really need to necessarily be in there to make the story feel fully rounded. Also, this is volume 1 and volume 2 isn't out yet, and as far as I'm aware, it doesn't really have like a definitive release date because the release date has been pushed back several times. And so you end this not really having all of your questions answered, and I found that to be very frustrating. At least I would have liked some resolution for some of the questions that were posed in this, but for the most part we don't really get to know enough about anything to make this feel worthwhile, in my opinion. I know this has been pretty popular on BookTube. A couple of years ago, a lot of people were reading and loving it, and that's why I ended up buying it, but now I kind of wish that I hadn't, because it just turned out to not really be my thing, and I'm really bummed about that. My other low for the month of May, unfortunately, was The Maid by Nita Prose. This is kind of like a cozy mystery type of story, all about a girl named Molly. She is a maid for this really upscale hotel, and at the start of the story, she finds a body in one of the rooms that she's cleaning. So she kind of gets mixed up in this mystery, and you find out that there's some crazy things going on at this hotel, and all the players in the story have some secrets of their own, as well as Molly herself has some secrets of her own. And so the whole book is just trying to figure out exactly what's going on in this hotel, how did this man die, but also who is Molly and what role does she play in this mystery. I thought that the concept of this was really interesting. I think that the idea of the story was a really solid one. However, I really didn't enjoy the execution. I talked at length in one of my vlogs about how I did not appreciate the characterization of Molly. It's pretty obvious, I think, that Molly is in some way on the autism spectrum, but the author never explicitly says that she is. And so there's this like question of doubt in your mind as you're reading whether or not she is actually on the autism spectrum. And if she's not, then the author just took a bunch of the characteristics of someone who could be autistic and turned her into a caricature of a person. Obviously, I'm not like an Own Voices reviewer, but I did read some reviews from people who are Own Voices reviewers saying that they didn't really appreciate the portrayal of Molly in the story because of that aspect. I had a hard time like really getting on board with it because it frustrated me the entire time. Overall, I did think the ending was a little bit clever. I liked how the mystery kind of wrapped up, and I like that you don't really necessarily get all of your questions answered, but you get enough answered that you can kind of speculate on the rest of it. But this is not a book that I would really recommend or will ever be rereading. I'm actually going to pass this on to my mom because I think that she would enjoy the mystery aspect of it, but this is not something that I am happy to have read. I wish that I would have just gotten it from the library instead of buying it because I feel like it was a waste of money. I know that there are people out there that have enjoyed it, and I am glad that somebody enjoyed the story more than I did. Now, moving on to my highs for the month. I had a really great month. Really, honestly, like those two books I showed you in my lows were really the only things that I didn't totally love, and everything else I really enjoyed. So I had 3 5-star reads for the month of May, which I'm gonna talk about at the end, but I'm gonna do 2 kind of like honorable mention highs really quick because I'm excited that I read these. First off, I read The Death of Vivek Oji by Akwaeke Emezi. This was on my 2022 5-star predictions, and while it wasn't quite a 5-star read, I did really enjoy it, and I'm so glad that I got around to reading it. I just reviewed this one in my last reading vlog, so you can check that out. And then my other honorable mention is A Conjuring of Light by V.E. Schwab, the 3rd and final book in the Shades of Magic trilogy. I'm really glad that I got around to reading this month because I marked off that trilogy off my currently reading series shelf, and also I really enjoyed how the series concluded. Now let's talk about my actual highs. Like I said, I had 3 5-star reads in the month of May, and I don't really know if I can rank them, but I'm gonna try. First off, I have A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara, which I debated on for basically the entire month whether or not I was actually going to give this 5 stars. When I first finished it, I just left it unrated because I wasn't really sure if I was going to be able to commit to a 5-star rating. After like sitting with it for basically the entire month and just thinking about it constantly, I decided that yeah, it did deserve to have 5 stars. If you don't know, this is a literary fiction novel set in New York City. It follows a group of 4 friends and how they kind of like weave in and out of each other's lives over the course of many, many decades. The reading experience was hard at times. It's one of the saddest books I've ever read. Like the last probably section of the book was just constant tears, and don't even get me started on the very last chapter because it broke me. And I totally understand why it doesn't work for a lot of people. I totally understand why people don't love it, but for me the story just worked. I loved these characters. I loved these relationships. I loved how the author crafted this book, and I'm so glad that I finally got around to reading it. I honestly can't believe that this was sitting on my shelf unread for like 4 years before I finally got around to it, because it was amazing. I loved it. I really loved it. Next up, I'm going to talk about Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason. I read this one because I was attempting to read the entirety of the Women's Prize for Fiction shortlist before the winner is announced in a couple of weeks. It follows a woman who is going through a marriage struggle. She's having some problems with her husband, and she is having to kind of reflect on their relationship and what brought them to this point. The book is told in sort of an alternating timeline because we get to see the main character and what led her to the point of her husband leaving her, and then we also kind of get to see the present day and what she's doing and how she's dealing with this loss. I really enjoyed the realness of the characters. I enjoyed the fact that the author didn't really shy away from harder topics. Even though this book looks like it could be kind of a sunshine, happy book, it was a hard book to read because the main character is dealing with some mental health issues, and she's not really necessarily getting support like she should be, and she's not really asking for help either, which can be frustrating. It's sad and it was hard to read at times, but again, kind of like A Little Life, it was a really gratifying reading experience. When I finished it, I immediately gave it 5 stars because I knew that it was a book that I was going to be thinking about for a long time. This is one that I listened to on audiobook, and I really enjoyed the listening experience because the narrator really just brought the story to life. I loved it, and I would highly recommend checking it out if it sounds like something that you want to read, could love, because I think you would. And finally, my last high for the month of May, probably my favorite book that I read in May, and probably a book that will be on my favorites of the year list, is Beautiful World, Where Are You by Sally Rooney. This book follows 2 friends who have had a bit of an estrangement in their relationship. They live in 2 separate places, and they haven't really seen each other or communicated with each other much over the last year or so, and the book is framed around these 2 sending each other emails about life and the state of the world and philosophy, and also them dealing with their own issues in their everyday lives. I talked about in one of my vlogs how Sally Rooney, like reading Sally Rooney to me feels like listening to Melodrama by Lorde. It makes so much sense to me. I loved how this book made me feel, and it's the same way that Melodrama makes me feel. Sally Rooney is just one of my favorite authors. I read and loved Normal People last year. It was my favorite book that I read in 2021. And like I said, this one will probably be on my favorites of 2022 list because she just is writing the kinds of books that I want to be consuming. I haven't read Conversations with Friends yet, but I know that when I get around to reading it, I will probably enjoy it just as much because it's very similar in tone. She writes millennials and their problems and dealing with coming of age in a modern world, and I love it. I love her. I love her writing. I love her books. I love her characters. She is one of my favorite authors, and I'm so glad that I read this. So yeah, those were my highs and lows of the month of May. It was overall a really great reading month. I read 13 books. That's one of the better reading months I've had all year long, and I'm so excited to be excited about reading. Like, I constantly want to be reading something, and it feels great that that is how I'm feeling right now, because pretty much for all of last year, I felt like I was in a reading slump, and to not be feeling that way now is just fantastic. So that's really gonna be it for this video. Let me know down in the comments if you've read any of the books that I mentioned in this video and what you thought about them. Do you have similar or different opinions to me? I'd really love to know. Also, let me know some books that you read in the month of May, or maybe your least favorite and favorite book that you read in May. I'd really love to know that as well. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you again very soon.